We have our second pitch hub of the day. We have Suzanne and Rainer from GIZ and Adelphi. And I'm not going to cut into their valuable time, so I'm just going to turn it straight over to Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And welcome, everybody. So our pitch is about a readiness program and how it evolves. Readiness was starting in approximately 2013 with the idea to prepare countries for the flood of climate finance that was expected to come. And the first and initial idea was to prepare them specially for the GCF, of course, the Green Climate Fund, but also to prepare their cooperation structures, their coordination structures, etc. So one of our initial ideas was to create some sort of a training to enable countries to have an informed discussion among themselves of how to organize themselves for climate finance. And this training entails really an overview of funds, of how to mobilize private sector, what gender is in climate finance, etc. So we conducted this training in many, many countries and expected the request for this training to go down immensely by 2016 because we thought, okay, every country is prepared now, things are up and running, so no problem, we don't need this training anymore. And we were surprised that, in fact, the demand was increasing. So when we checked with our partners, what is your interest in the training? Because we think you have an NDA, you know how accreditation works, you know what tagging is, tracking, etc. There are so many initiatives supporting mobilization of private finance, etc. The answer was that, well, first of all, there's a lot of turnover in these countries, and secondly, we are more interested also now to investigate project development. And in fact, NDCs are up, they're existing, they are our new framework, and they need to be implemented. So instead of just adding another module to this existing training on project development, we decided to create a totally new training because, in fact, NDCs won't be implemented by the climate community. They will be implemented by the energy sector, the water sector, agriculture, forest, industry, water, etc. So the intention was to have a training or some sort of a tool to get in touch with these sectors and really to discuss and start the reflection, what is climate in your sector, what could be relevant, where could your sector contribute to NDC implementation. So what we developed is a climate finance training for sector experts. We piloted it, applied it already several times, and also had a training of trainers so that we have people who can also implement it. And it basically tries to pick up people working in sectors where they are, reflecting with them, okay, what is climate in your sector? How could indicators look like? How could you express this climate relevance in your sector? Then we'll have a look at the GCF just as an example, or the most difficult example maybe for climate finance existing. Always pointing out that GCF is not the only fruit, of course. And then also looking in things like NDCs, where obviously it would be really important if sectors in countries would contribute to the next phase of improved NDCs. And then I'll look into financing mechanisms, which are always quite difficult to understand. The GCF is offering quite a lot, but also other tools like NAMAS, etc., always ask for financing mechanisms. And many people, many of our partners are very familiar with donors and grants, but now don't know about financing mechanisms. So that's part of what we're providing here. And last but not least, we go into the concept note of the GCF just to give a broad picture of what this entails. So that's a bit to give you an idea of what this tool is about. And I would like now to pass on to Rainer, who has a couple of interesting examples where this tool has been used or where this tool could be used in order to trigger relevant climate finance projects. And we have a couple of these projects we use in the training. We nicely developed the tools just also to show who's coming in when, what bank, what kind of equity provider comes in at what point, just to give a bit of an idea of the complexity of this whole process. So please, Rainer, the floor is yours.
Thanks. When we did the pilot of this in Jordan last year, we looked at the water sector, basically. And there we had water sector experts. And one thing which strikes right away, as soon as you talk to water sector experts or other sector experts who are not so much involved with the climate community, they have their complete own logic of how financing works, how different sectors approach the financing topic. And if we want to reach scale, and that's, I think, one thing, if you go to the summit yesterday, it's always about the billions and sometimes the trillions. If you want to reach scale, we need a closer link within climate finance community to existing financing mechanisms. And to give you an example from Jordan, they right away came up, these sector experts, with saying they want to build basically a pipeline, a water pipeline from the south to the north of the country, which is already foreseen, and there's already financing concepts behind that. And you could say, okay, let's use the climate finance logic as foreseen in the GCF, for example, to finance this. Or you could also say, let's have a look into the financing mechanisms which are existing in the sector, for example, the water sector, which are there. Another example which is close to the water sector is the urban climate finance. And we have been asked as Adelphi in the last years to write a couple of studies. And actually, my colleague Annika is also going to present some of these results later on. If you look at urban financing, how municipalities are financed, and they are prone to take one of the burdens when it comes especially to adaptation finance, they have in each country a complete own logic. We looked into South Africa, we looked into India, we looked into the US, into China, into Germany, into Chile, how the financing works. And in each country, it was really completely different. So if we come now from a climate perspective and say we need a kind of one-size-fits-all climate finance, it's not going to work, because municipalities are not going to change their financing systems. The question is how to most closely adopt also the climate finance logic sometimes to these local sectors. And there's a lot to be learned from the sector experts for the climate community. If you look at the climate community at the moment, sometimes I feel it like in a little box or sometimes a bubble, yeah. and we try to come out and then do trainings like Clifford to teach the others about climate, but maybe it's also sometimes more a question, how can we adopt the logic of climate finance to what's already existing on the ground? I think two sectors where this is working quite nicely already is renewable energies and energy efficiency, because with their mitigation potential, they're very close to what's going on. And as Adelphi, we do a lot of work on credit lines for renewable energies, for energy efficiency. But also there's still a lot to be learned and adjusted, and how to think of how the credit lines work, for example, how do funds sometimes work in these sectors, what's their logic there, how can this be aligned with the climate logic to a certain degree. And this is something which I think a training, and it's actually called a training, but actually a lot of the work is being done by the participants. It's more an experience, and from what we have seen in Jordan, and hopefully we'll also now see in other countries, it will be quite an experience also for the climate people in the country to learn more about the different sectors. And each sector has really a completely different logic. I find that very fascinating, completely different ways how to organize and structure their financing for the specific sector. And a lot can be learned. Thanks.
Oh, thank you all very much. Yeah, would you like to sit down? It's a dynamic pitch hub,
Yeah, exactly.
so we can make these decisions on the fly. Suzanne, Reiner, thank you very much for that overview of the really important work that you're doing. I mean, I also work supposedly in the broad umbrella of climate finance, and even sometimes I get overwhelmed looking at the alphabet soup of the resources that are available, and that's just the existing things, right? As you point out, sometimes people come to the table and say, well, what new thing can we do? And it's like, no. Take a deep breath. What else is existing that's out there, and how can we adapt it for your particular needs? So I certainly think that the challenge is large, and the work that you're doing here is really, really important. One really basic question: who would you say, in your opinion, is your number one client? Is it governments? Is it private sector? In the whole space, who would you say, who's taking advantage most of your services?
Well, I think the charming part of it is that it's really adaptable to everything. Already the initial CLIFFIT training that I was presenting first was adapted and applied for several target groups. And I think this training is even more easy to adapt, because in the end of the day, the real transformation will only take place if the whole actors chain, if you like, is on the boat. Yeah. And let me just add, I think even the donor world and the implementers, to include us as well, could profit from it, because we are all thinking in silos. It's this structure is reflected everywhere, and a transformative change for climate change would come abroad if we remain on our silos, including the climate world, as just Reiner said, if we remain in the climate bubble.
I think easy answer is who pays for it. It's usually public money. It's pretty straightforward. Who benefits and who we gear our services to is 50% public, 50% private.
Great. It seems to me, from what I've learned today, that this is a rather labor-intensive exercise, but very worthwhile. And I see Reiner getting a reaction. So in case not, I mean, why not and how not? What I think of, we have this saying from where I'm from, it's why give a person a fish when you can teach them how to fish? And so, you go in and do these in-depth trainings where you sit down with folks from Jordan in the water sector and try to help show them the lay of the land, especially in a dynamic environment that's changing all the time. Do you find it challenging, and if so, how, to try to teach them how to fish as opposed to just giving the fish? And if so, how do you do that? And what works and what doesn't work?
I would say it's set up in a way we don't teach them how to fish. I think it's called a training, but in the end, it's themselves experimenting and finding a good way to fish in their context. And I think that's something which usually lasts. And first of all, I wouldn't say it's labor intensive, but because it's you basically need two people. Once the thing is developed, you need two people giving the training. I think most of the work, definitely also from time-wise, comes from the people attending the training. That's pretty clear. So I wouldn't call it labor intensive from my perspective.
Yeah, I basically agree. I think it's quite demanding of a trainer, because you also have to think. You have to know the sector quite well and be able really to adapt yourself to the new logic of this particular sector. So, yeah, there's quite some preparation time to do, but, you can always do it with a sector expert together.
Just like our dynamic pitch hub, you all need to be dynamic just to be able to go into a new environment and be able to provide those resources for folks and that's a lifetime and a career of experiences and being able to adapt. How do you go through and identify your clients for the training? Are you proactive and you seek out particular folks, or do you wait for them? Are you more passive, or is it some kind of in between? How would someone come to you and take advantage of your services?
Well, we have the charming position, if you like, as GIZ, that we are working quite in a big number of countries in a big number of sectors. So one easy access is to alert our colleagues and ask them or inform them about this option and go through their access to the countries as well. So that's something we do, and we already successfully did, like, for example, in Jordan, the water sector. We actually developed the training together with colleagues in the water sector in order to straight away integrate this perspective, and also had some sort of a sounding board from other sectors to be sure we are on the right side, on the safe side. So this is certainly one approach. The other approach is then spreading the information to our partners.
Great. I want to give the opportunity to the audience in case there's any questions or comments from anyone who's joined us. Certainly, gentleman in the back.
I have a question. In real, do you co-produce the financial proposals with the people you do the training for? Like similar in other multi-donor programs, that the donor papers are written by experts who supporting these people. Do you do it in that way actually? Because I do not believe that it's so simple for someone in Jordania to write such an administrative thing.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, we had a debate during the training of trainer session, because there are trainings like this in the room or in the world, let's say, who prepare partners to write proposals. And in our opinion, that is not really a good idea, especially when it comes to GCF proposals, which are, well, way too complicated, and it's really the accredited entities who are in charge of this. And in fact, there's quite a danger that we have too many concept notes for whom you will never find any accredited entity who will implement it. And even if you go beyond GCF, you always need somebody who's willing to implement a project proposal. So it doesn't really make sense to train many people who are normally already overcharged in administrations of partner countries to write complicated and complex, lengthy proposals. So this is clearly not the intention, and one of the key messages is that we go through the concept note to inform you what kind of questions are asked, what kind of areas you have to assess and to deal with. But this is not really your task to write it, and it might not even be your task to steer the process. You have to be part of it, of course. You have to be the initiator, you have to accompany the process, but there are others who are really in charge to write the whole thing, of course not without your consent, on the consent of the country. Yeah, but thanks for the question again. No, that's not the intention, to teach proposal writing.
But what's surely the intention is that the concepts which are laid out, that they are developed in close cooperation with the people from the sector and actually doing the work. Because I think that's sometimes missing. It's a little bit coming from somewhere out of space and then put on the ground. And here, with this concept, we kind of force the people from the sector to actually, at least to a certain degree, adjust their logic, yeah, and then jointly develop the concept. How the documents are later on written, I think that's something else, and I fully agree with what Susanne said.
I manage a couple of our trust funds at the World Bank, where we do some climate finance as well. And when we go out and talk to potential projects, I think that's one of the approaches we take as well, is at the end of the day, we want our counterparts to own their projects, right? They're the ones who will be in Jordan or wherever implementing it on the ground. And so they need to have a full, complete understanding of what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. And so as we can train them to use the resources that are available to them to set up their own project and run and implement it, that's really the more challenging work I find, but the more rewarding when it all works out. And so I think that's also something we do, but that's also can be challenging at times. So the title of your pitch was What's Next in Climate Finance Readiness? And we've talked a lot about what you're doing, but maybe we start to answer this question up on the slide.
Yeah, I think what's next in climate finance is really going out of the climate bubble, going to sectors, going to implementation. And well, with this tool, we wanted to kind of show the next step that we have already taken and that we apply in many countries. So maybe, Rainer, you can also delve into some of the examples in order to showcase this.
I think, like, if you talk about finance, at least that's my experience, we are doing a lot of technical assistance for financing projects. And actually, the closer, that's a basic message, the closer the new financing product is to what is there on the ground already existing, the bigger the uptake usually. That's pretty clear. And so for from my perspective, next in climate finance readiness is that there is more instruments which are very close to what's already existing, but bringing in the climate angle to a certain degree. And the next one is definitely scale. The question is how to get bigger about this. And to get bigger is if we stay close. Why is there so much success in green bonds? We also work in green bonds because it's a bond, basically. It's very similar to what's existing. And I think that's going to be very similar in many climate finance aspects. And the other one, for me, that's at least one I hope for, which is next, is that there are more domestic resources going towards climate finance. We always talk about the GCF and international resources. There's so much more resources domestically, and I think that's for me what's maybe not immediately next, but maybe a day later coming up.
I think that's a really prescient topic. Not only international finance, we talk about private finance and turning the billions into the trillions, but how can we set up these processes and build capacity in governments and institutions to unlock the domestic spending for climate on infrastructure and resilience and adaptation? And I completely agree with you. I think that's a big part of what's next and a big challenge, but something that's worthwhile. Do you have any?
Maybe one example on that.
Of course,
really work really nice there. And we just recently looked at renewable energy credit lines, green credit lines from French Development Corporation, and they did quite a lot of work in Turkey. And what actually happened with the Turkish banks was that they set up their products similar to, first it was kind of made as a sweetener with the credit lines coming in, but then actually they did the same products locally in the domestic market with domestic financing. Pretty much the same. And like that's an ideal way for sustainability, and it's actually already happening as climate finance. And there's no international money needed additionally for that at the moment. So that's I think a good example. Of course, at the moment Turkish situation is not the easiest, but like in general there was just an observation which happened, which was going very nicely, and I would be hoping that more of these are coming up.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a case where I'd actually be very happy for someone else to step in and do our jobs, right? Because then it's sustainable in the long term. I think that's the key. We just have 2 or 3 more minutes left. Do either of you have one last kind of pitch or summary argument to the audience before we conclude for the day?
I actually think there was another question.
Oh, do we have another question from the audience? Let's do that quickly.
I thought I saw a hand rising. No, sorry. Okay.
Do we? No?
Okay, no.
Go for it then, please.
Okay. Yes. Well, I would like to enter into discussions with you, the audience, and also found it really encouraging to see this discussion taking place here in the events, to come into touch with sectors. And I think what really is a bit overwhelming still is energy. There's a lot going on. And what's still a bit missing are many other sectors which are so relevant for climate change, especially also for adaptation, but where very often there's also a very high mitigation part in it, like water, which is so crucial. My real request for you would be to go out and approach other sectors and take them here for the next time.
Yeah, I can only agree. And you said it before, get out of the climate box. I think that's the main one. Yeah, there's so much out there, and it's actually fun. Like I jump a lot between the boxes, but I also tell the people in the other boxes, the energy box, like thinking more about climate. And I think that's could be part of it. And then maybe there's, as you said, if there would be more here, that would be great. Thanks.
Well, Suzanne, Rainer, thank you very much for joining us. I think this was a really good discussion that, as you say, will need to continue. We didn't solve it up here, unfortunately, in our 25 minutes on the stage. But thanks very much, and hopefully we can continue the conversation through the rest of I4C. Thanks very much.